I never told anyone at Scary Halt what I used to be, and for 11 years nobody thought to ask. An old man hauling freight through a cold that would kill most of them was a curiosity for about a week, and after that I was furniture. That suited me. I had come out to the edge of the charted lanes to be furniture. A man reaches a certain age and a certain count of things done, and he wants a quiet corner and a job that ends when the shift ends. Scary Halt was carved into the belly of a rogue planetoid, a dead ball of rock and ice that wandered the dark between three systems and belonged to none of them. That was why the traders liked it. No flag, no tariff, no law but the one the strongest crew wrote that season. The core of the halt was warm, lit amber, crowded, stalls and berths and grog holes stacked 6 levels deep around a central shaft. Out past the core, where the tunnels ran toward the old survey docks, it got colder with every meter, until you reached the Deadside, where the ice never thawed and the air itself would take a body apart if you gave it long enough. Most of the species who lived at the halt never went past the second bulkhead in their lives. The cold out there was not a hardship to them. It was a verdict. The Threll understood that better than anyone. They had come to the halt maybe 2 years before I did. A crew of them, mottled gray and soft and long-limbed, cephalopod stock from some humid world I never learned the name of. They moved through the warm core like ink through water, unhurried, always damp, always leaving that faint brine smell behind them. They were not large. A grown Threll stood a head shorter than I did and had no bones to speak of, just muscle and cartilage and those flat, unreadable eyes set wide on a smooth skull. You would not, looking at one, think danger. That was their whole art. They let you underestimate them, and then they took everything you had slowly, and if you argued they put you in the cold. That was the phrase everyone used. Put in the cold, cooled. It sounded almost gentle, the way people said it in a low voice glancing at the tunnel mouths. What it meant was that the Threll would walk you past the second bulkhead, past the third, out into the Deadside where your thermals could not hold, and they would leave you there. Sometimes they came back for the body and sometimes they let the cold keep it. They did not need to do it often. They had done it enough early that the memory did the work. A crew that owns the one thing everyone fears does not have to raise its voice. I watched them run the halt for 11 years and I did not lift a hand, because it was not my station and they were not my problem, and I had promised myself, a long time back, that I was done making other people's fear my business. I hauled crates. I fixed the loaders when they seized in the cold. I drank a measure of grog on the 6th day, and I slept and I did it again. When the Threll came through the freight bay to take their cut, I set down what I was carrying and I let them count it, and I said nothing, and they looked at the old thermal-less man and thought, furniture, and went on. 11 years of that. I thought it might be the rest of my life, and I did not mind. Then they cooled Ibit, and I found out I was not as finished as I had let myself believe. Ibit ran a broth stall on the 4th level, a little furred creature no bigger than a child, from some Warren world where they lived long and worried much. She sold a hot dark broth out of a battered urn, and she had been selling it there since before the Threll came, since before me, and she gave it away to anyone who came in from a cold shift looking half dead. She had given it to me 100 times without asking a coin. She talked too much and she remembered everything about everyone, and she had never in her life done harm to a soul. When the freight loaders threw me and left me with a cracked forearm my second winter there, it was Ibit who splinted it and fed me broth for a week and clucked at me the whole time. I did not have many I would call a friend. I would have called her one. The Threll came for her over a matter of 40 coins. I was in the 4th level passage when it happened, 3 stalls down, wrestling a jammed cargo brace back onto its track. I heard the pitch of it before I understood the words, Ibit's voice gone high and fast, and under it the flat wet murmur of a Threll, patient, the way they always were. I set down the brace and I looked, because a man looks. 2 of them had her stall. The younger one, Set they called him, was turning her urn over in his long hands, letting the broth run out onto the deck, not because he wanted the broth gone but because he wanted her to watch it go. The other was the one they called the prime second. Marlowe, old for a thrall, gray gone near to white at the mantle, one eye clouded. He did the talking. The count was short, he was saying. The count had been short 3 cycles running. He was sorry, he said sorry the way they all did, like a man setting down a tool he would pick up again in a moment. But the prime did not like a short count, and a short count had to be answered, or the next count would be short too, and then where would they all be? Ibit was saying she would make it up. She was saying she had been ill, that the broth trade had been thin, that she would have the 40 coins and 40 more by the next count, that she had always paid, that she had never once, and Marlowe lifted one long gray arm, not fast, not hard, and touched her on the shoulder, and she stopped talking. That was all. He touched her and she went quiet because everyone at the halt knew what that touch meant. It meant the cold. I want to be honest about what I did because it matters to the rest of it. I did not step in. I stood 3 stalls down with my hands loose at my sides, and I watched them walk that small furred creature toward the tunnel mouth, and I did not move. I told myself it was not my station. I told myself she might yet talk her way clear, that they were only frightening her, that they would take her to the second bulkhead and let her shiver and bring her back. I told myself a great many useful things in the space of about 10 seconds, and every one of them was a way of not moving, and I knew it, and I stood there anyway. They did not take her to the second bulkhead. I know because I followed, not right away. I told myself I was only going to see, only going to make sure they brought her back. I let them get well ahead down the freight tunnel, and I came after slow, and the cold came up around me the way it always did, the way it never troubled me, a dry knife edge in the air that thickened with every bulkhead. Past the second, the frost stood on the walls in feathers. Past the third, the loader lights gave out, and there was only the emergency strip along the floor, dim red, and my own breath not even fogging because a cinderborn body does not waste that much heat into air that cold. I heard them ahead. I heard Ibit, not talking anymore, just a small sound, the sound a warm creature makes when the cold has gotten into the center of it and it has understood what that means. They left her at the 4th bulkhead in the dark, on the Deadside floor. I heard them come back. I stepped into a survey alcove and let them pass, the 2 of them, unhurried, Marlowe and the young one saying something and Marlowe not answering, and the brine smell of them going by in the red dark, and then they were gone toward the warm, and I was alone in the cold with a dying friend 40 meters deeper in than any of them had ever gone by choice. I found her by the emergency strip, curled at the foot of the bulkhead where she had tried to work the manual release and had not had the strength or the warmth left in her fingers to turn it. Her fur was going white with frost. She was not moving much. When I put my hand on her she flinched, and then she made that small sound again, and I understood she thought a thrall had come back to check the work. "It's Wren," I said. My voice did not fog either. "It's the old freight hand. I'm going to carry you out." I do not know if she understood. I got her up against my chest. She weighed nothing. A warm creature emptied of most of its warmth, and I turned back toward the core and I walked. The cold pressed on me the whole way, Deadside cold, the kind that had killed more species at that station than the thrall ever had directly, and it did to me what it always did, which was very little. It made my joints ache. It made the old scars pull. It reminded me of worse. I walked out of the Deadside carrying Ibit, and I did not hurry, because hurrying in that cold with a fragile thing in your arms is how you drop it. And by the time I passed the second bulkhead back into the amber warmth of the core, there were people in the passage who had heard somehow. The way things travel at a station, and they stood and stared at the old man walking out of the cold that nobody walked out of. I took her to the 4th level and I put her behind her own ruined stall, and I wrapped her in every thermal cloth I could pull off the racks, and I sat with her while the warmth came back into her and she wept, and I did not say anything, because there was nothing to say that would be true and kind at the same time. When she was warm enough to sleep, I left her with a neighbor, a broad, quiet trader who had always liked her broth, and I went back to my berth, and I did not sleep at all. I had broken my own rule. I had gone into the cold for someone. That was one thing. The larger thing, the thing I lay awake turning over, was that a great many people had watched me do it. 11 years I had been furniture, and in one night I had walked out of the Deadside carrying a body that should have been mine to bury, and I had done it without so much as a thermal cloak, and there is no unseeing a thing like that. The Threll would hear of it by morning, and the Threll had built everything they had on a single fact that the cold was theirs, that they owned the one door nobody else could walk through. I had just walked through it in front of a passage full of witnesses. I lay in the dark and I understood, with the flat certainty of a man who has understood such things before, that they could not let that stand. Not because I had insulted them. Because I had shown the halt that their door had no lock on it, and a crew that rules by one fear cannot survive the day that fear is proven hollow. They would have to put me in the cold publicly and make sure I stayed. I found I was not afraid of that. I lay there and I checked myself for the fear the way you check an old wound for whether it still bleeds, and it did not. What I felt instead was a kind of tiredness, and under the tiredness, so old and so buried that I almost did not recognize it, the thing I had come to the edge of the charted lanes to get away from. The willingness. The cold, flat willingness to do what the situation required and to keep doing it until the situation was resolved. I had been very good at that once. It had taken me a long time to stop. I understood, lying in the dark, that I was about to be good at it again, and that this time there would be no one to stop me and no reason to want to be stopped, and I lay with that until the shift lights came up amber over Scary Halt, and I got up and went to work like it was any other day. They came for me in the freight bay a little after mid-shift. 4 of them which told me they had thought about it. The Threll did not usually travel in 4s. Set was there, the young one, still sulking about the broth, and 2 others I knew by sight but not name, and the Prime himself. Vale Osk. I had seen him perhaps a dozen times in 11 years, always at a distance, always still. He was the largest Threll at the halt and the palest, an old scar seeming his mantle, where something had once tried to open him and failed, and he had eyes that did not miss things. He came into my freight bay, and he looked around it slowly, at the crates and the seized loader I had half stripped, and the old man standing beside it with a brace stool in his hand, and he made the wet clicking sound that passed for a Threll clearing its throat. "You went into the cold," he said. His trade speech was good, better than most of theirs, the words shaped careful and slow. "Past the 4th bulkhead. You brought the broth cellar out." "I did," I said. "No one brings anyone out of the Deadside." "Somebody did." He was quiet a moment. Behind him the other 3 had spread out along the bay, unhurried the way they did, so that if I ran there would be a Threll between me and every door. It was well done. It was the work of a crew that had done this many times and never once had it go wrong. "You are old," Osk said. "You have worked here a long time and you have never been a trouble, so I will explain it to you once as a courtesy because you were kind to a creature who was nothing to you, and I understand kindness even when it is foolish." He drifted a step closer. The brine smell came with him. "The cold is ours. That is the whole of it. Not the freight, not the coin, those are only what the cold buys us. If it becomes known that a person can walk into the Deadside and walk out again, then the cold is nobody's, and then we are only 4 soft things far from home, and the halt will remember every count we ever took. You see the problem." "I see it," I said, and I did. He had laid it out plainly and honestly, and he was, by his own lights, entirely correct. "So," he said, and there was something almost like regret in the flat, wet voice, "you will go back into the cold. This time you will not come out, and enough of the halt will see you go in that the lesson holds. It is not personal. You are simply the wrong thing to have been seen." I set down the brace tool. I did it slowly, because there is a way of setting down a tool that tells 4 armed strangers you have decided to be no trouble, and there is another way that tells them nothing at all, and I used the second way without quite meaning to. Old habits. Osk's flat eyes tracked the tool to the floor and came back up to my face, and something moved behind them, some first faint arithmetic, because he had not survived long enough to run a station by missing small things. "I'll walk," I said. "No need for the four of you to crowd an old man, which bulkhead." That threw the young one set. He had braced for me to fight or beg, and instead the old freight hand was asking, polite, which door he'd prefer to die behind. The other two glanced at Osk. Osk did not glance at anyone. He looked at me for a long moment, and then he made the clicking sound again, softer. "The fifth," he said, "past the survey docks. You will want the fourth because that is where you found the broth cellar and you think you know the way, but we will take you to the fifth, where the way is not known and you will not find a manual release in the dark because past the fifth there are none." He drifted back toward the tunnel mouth, unhurried, certain. "Walk then. It is a courtesy that you walk. Most do not get to." So I walked. I want to be exact about the next part, because it is where a man could tell it wrong and make it sound like more than it was. It was not more than it was. There was no rage in me and there was no fear, and there was certainly nothing like a plan, not the way people mean when they say a plan. There was only the cold coming up around us as we went deeper, and the four thrill around me, and the flat arithmetic in the back of my own skull that I had not run in 11 years and had not, it turned out, forgotten how to run at all. The arithmetic went like this: cephalopod stock, soft-bodied, damp, from a humid world. I had spent enough winters at the halt to have watched the thrill in the cold at the second bulkhead where they took people to frighten them, and I had noticed a thing that no one else there had reason to notice, because no one else there had ever needed to think about who the cold was for. The thrill did not like the cold either. They tolerated it far better than the broth cellar had, far better than most of the warm species at the halt. They could push out past the third bulkhead where nothing else living could, but they did not like it, and past a certain depth, past a certain cold, they slowed. I had seen it. At the third bulkhead a thrill's movements got just slightly thick, its long arms just slightly less sure, the damp skin of it stiffening as the moisture in it began, ever so slightly, to freeze. They could go deep. They could go deeper than anything else at the halt. But they could not go as deep as I could. Nothing at the halt could go as deep as I could. That was the one fact the whole crew had been built on top of without ever once turning it over to look underneath. We passed the second bulkhead. The frost stood in feathers on the walls. Osk led and Set walked at my shoulder, and the other two came behind, and none of them had bothered with heavy thermals because they were only going to the fifth bulkhead and coming straight back. And coming straight back is faster than a body can lose its warmth for a thrill. Nobody had done the arithmetic on how long the old man in front of them could keep them out there. Nobody but me. Past the third bulkhead the loader lights gave out and there was only the red emergency strip. I heard the change in them then, the small thickening in the way they moved, Set's damp arm brushing my sleeve gone just slightly clumsy. Osk felt it too. He picked up the pace. That was correct of him. That was exactly what a careful commander does when he feels the cold reaching into his people. He shortens the exposure. He gets the work done and gets them back to the warm. It was correct, and it was the thing I had been counting on, because a man who is hurrying is a man who has stopped watching the one thing he cannot afford to stop watching. He had stopped watching me. At the fourth bulkhead, where I had found Ibit, where I did know the way, whatever Osk believed, I stopped walking. I did not lunge. I did not shout. I have never in my life understood the men who shout at the moment of a thing. The shout is for them to carry them over the edge of doing it, and I had never needed carrying. I simply stopped in the red dark at the bulkhead I knew, and when Set came up level with me, still moving, I put my hand on the back of his mantle, and I put him into the wall. He was soft. I have said that. Soft-bodied things are terrible in a fight if they get their arms on you, all leverage and grip, and they are nothing at all if you do not let them, if you end it before it starts, at the seam, with the whole cold weight of 11 years of hauling freight behind your arm. Set hit the frost-feathered wall, and the cold that had already stiffened him did the rest, and he went down onto the Deadside deck and did not get up quickly. And by then I had already turned, because there were 3 more and the arithmetic did not care how I felt about the young one. The 2 behind had been the back of the column, the cold in them the deepest, their arms the slowest. I took the nearer one at the joint of the arm, the way you take a soft thing, folding it wrong against itself until the thickened muscle would not answer, and I put him down beside Set. The second got a grip on my coat, got it, the one thing they must not be allowed, and I let the coat go, shrugged clean out of it, and left him holding an old thermal-less coat in the cold while I stepped past his reach and took him from behind. And then there were 3 threll on the Deadside floor at the 4th bulkhead, and only Vale Osk still standing. He had turned by then. He was old and he was clever and he was the largest of them and the cold reached him slowest. And he had turned to find his crew on the ground and the furniture standing over them in the red dark, breathing slow, not fogging the air. He did not run. I will give him that always. He had run a station by fear for years, and he had every reason to believe fear was the only real thing in the world. And he stood in the killing cold with 3 of his crew down, and he looked at me, and I watched him do the arithmetic at last. The arithmetic he should have done in the freight bay when I set down the tool the wrong way, and I watched him arrive at the answer. "Cinderborn," he said, "it was not quite a question." "That's one word for it," I said. "I have heard of your kind." His voice had gone thick with the cold now, the words coming slower, the long arms held close to his body where the warmth was. "Old stories, border war a lifetime ago before I came out to the quiet lanes. My Marlowe was there. Marlowe told stories. I thought they were stories." The clouded flat eyes did not leave my face. "You feel it, the cold, you must feel it." "I feel it," I said. "It just doesn't do to me what it does to you." We stood in that. He was not slowing the way the others had. He was the biggest and the oldest and the toughest of them, and he could have held out in that cold a good while longer, long enough maybe, to reach the warm if he turned and went now and did not look back. I think he knew it. I think that was the last piece of arithmetic he ran, standing over his fallen crew, that he could still walk out, that he could leave them and reach the amber warmth of the core and be Vale Osk again, and rebuild and rule. And he understood because he was clever, because he had not missed a thing in years except the one thing he could not afford, that it would not matter, that the halt had already seen the old man walk out of the Deadside once, that whatever he rebuilt would be built on a fear that had a hole in it now, and that the hole had a face, and the face was mine, and it was not going anywhere, and it did not feel the cold. "You could let me walk," he said. It was not a plea. The threll did not plead. It was one of the few things I ever admired about them. It was an offer laid out plainly the way he had laid out my death in the freight bay. I would leave the halt, take the crew and go. You would not see us again. "I believe you would go," I said, and I did believe it. "But you'd stop at the next station and you'd find the next cold door and you'd own it the same way because it's the only way you know, and there'd be another broth cellar there and no old man who feels no cold." I was quiet a moment. The red strip hummed. "I stopped doing this a long time ago, Osk. I came all the way out here to stop. I'm not going to do it and then let it walk to the next station and start again. That's not stopping. That's just moving the thing along." He took that in. And then he did the last correct thing of his life, which was to stop wasting warmth on words, and come for me, fast as the cold would let him, all those long gray arms opening to get a grip on the one thing he must not be allowed to grip. He was soft like the rest, he was only bigger. I took him into the cold he had spent years teaching the halt to fear. Not at the 4th bulkhead, deeper, past the 5th where he had meant to leave me, into the true Deadside where the ice never thaws and the air itself takes a body apart, because he was strong and the 4th would not have held him, and because it was, in a way I did not examine too closely at the time, the correct place. He fought the whole way, and it did him no good, because a soft-bodied thing in the deep cold slows and slows, and a cinder-born man does not, and there is no leverage in the world that beats a grip that simply outlasts you. I held him in the Deadside dark until the cold did to him what he had done to more people than either of us could have counted, and I was sorry for it in a distant way. The way you are sorry about a hard thing that could not be otherwise. And then it was done, and I let him down onto the ice. And I stood a moment in the killing cold that was only weather to me. And then I went back for the other three. They were alive. Softened, slowed, badly hurt, but alive. I had put them down, not out. I carried them out one at a time, past the fourth bulkhead, past the third and second, back into the amber warmth of the core, and I set them down in the freight bay where the whole thing had begun. And by then, of course, the halt had gathered. They always gather. Word travels at a station faster than a man can walk a body out of the cold. They stood in the passages and on the gantries above the freight bay, and they looked at the three threll laid out on the deck, warming slowly, and they looked at the old freight hand standing over them with no coat on and no fog on his breath, and nobody said anything for a long time. It was Marlowe who broke it. The old one, the near-white one, the one who had touched Ibbott's shoulder and started all of it, and who had, it turned out, been on some border a lifetime ago and lived to tell his prime stories that the prime thought were only stories. He came forward through the crowd, slow, the clouded eye catching the amber light, and he looked down at his three crewmates on the deck and then up at me, and he did not ask where Osk was. He knew. He had known, I think, the moment word reached him that the old man had come out of the cold a second time. "You are the last of them," he said, "aren't you? The Cinderborn, the border war took most, and the rest are old now, and there are not many left who remember what you were." The wet voice was quiet, almost gentle. "I remember, I was young. I saw a thing like you walk through our line in the cold on Vess, and I have never in my life been able to forget the way it did not hurry." He was quiet. I told Osk the stories, and he laughed. He was not there. He thought fear was a thing you built. He never understood that sometimes it is only a thing you notice, walking toward you, that does not feel the cold. "You put Ibbott in the Deadside," I said. "I did." He did not look away from it. I will give him that too. "I have done it many times. I am not going to tell you I did not, or that I will not answer for it. I am old and I am tired of the cold, and if you mean to put me in it, then I have earned it more honestly than anyone here." He spread the long gray arms, slow, empty. "But I will tell you a thing first, because you are the last of your kind and there is no one else I could ever tell it to who would understand. It was never the cold that ruled this station. It was the not knowing. The halt was afraid of the Deadside because the Deadside kept what it took. You walked in and out of it twice, and now they are not afraid of the Deadside. They are afraid of you." The clouded eye held mine. "That is worse. That is much worse. The cold, at least, was fair. It took everyone the same. You are not fair. You are the one thing the cold does not touch, and now they know it, and you will find, old man, that furniture does not get to be furniture again once it has walked out of the Deadside carrying a prime." I have thought about that a great deal in the years since, because he was right, in the way that clever old survivors are so often right and so rarely comforted by it. I did not put Marlowe in the cold. I found I did not have it in me, over an old creature who answered honestly for what he'd done and asked for nothing. I let the halt decide what to do with the three of them, and the halt, freed all at once from a fear it had lived inside for years, did what freed people do, some of it just, some of it not, none of it my business any more. The threll left scary halt within the season, those that could still travel. Marlowe was not among them. Marlowe stayed, and got old the rest of the way, and sometimes on the sixth day I would see him at the edge of Ibbott's rebuilt broth stall, taking a measure of the hot dark broth she gave away to anyone who came in from the cold, including in time to him, because Ibbott forgave things that I could not, which is why she was the better creature and always had been. They wanted me to run the halt after. Of course they did. That is the other thing freed people do. They look for the next strong hand to hold the door, and the old man who walked out of the Deadside was the strongest hand anyone there had ever seen. I told them no. I told them the whole trouble with the halt had always been that it let one crew on the cold, and that the answer was not a better owner. I told them to jam the manual releases open past the second bulkhead so no one could ever be sealed out there again, and to teach every child at the station the way back from the Deadside in the dark, so that the cold would never again be a thing that only one crew understood. Some of that they did. Some of it they forgot within a year. People are people, at the edge of the charted lanes the same as anywhere. I went back to hauling freight. Marlowe had been right that I would not get to be furniture again, and I did not. There is no unseeing what they saw, but I found that if I did the work quietly and asked for nothing and put my hand on no one, they let the seeing fade, the way a station lets everything fade, under the amber light and the endless small business of trade. In a few years there were new arrivals at the halt who had only heard the story second-hand, and did not quite believe it, and looked at the old thermal-less freight hand and thought, if they thought anything, that he must have a good implant to work the cold docks at his age. That suited me. I had come out to the edge of the charted lanes to be furniture, and for 11 years I had been, and then for one night I had been the other thing, the old thing, the thing I had crossed the charted lanes to stop being. And then I set it down again, as carefully as I had once set down a brace stool the wrong way in a freight bay, and I picked up a crate and I went back to work. The cold never troubled me. It never had. But I will tell you what I learned at Scary Halt, that I had somehow gone a whole long life of hard winters without learning, that a man can walk through the coldest dark there is and feel nothing, and still, when he comes out the other side carrying someone warm, understand at last exactly how cold it was.